I unfolded the envelope and let my gaze drift across the gilded edges of the seating area. Aunt Lenore, who had once tutored me in etiquette yet never hidden her disdain for my muddy boots and rumpled notebooks, stared back with cool detachment. Cousin Hector, with his custom-tailored suit that cost more than my first car, leaned forward as though he could peer into my thoughts. Even my younger sister, Bianca, sat with her chin raised, lips curved in that half-smile that said she'd always thought herself superior. The family solicitor cleared his throat, a brittle sound that cut the tension. He was a wiry man with spectacles perched precariously on the tip of his nose, a man who knew secrets and held them tightly. He opened a leather-bound book and adjusted his glasses. "To begin," he said, voice steady, "my late client, Reginald Oliver Knighton, wished to express his profound love and pride for his family, and to clarify the dispositions of his estate." A murmur rippled through the room. I inhaled steadily, reminding myself why I came. For years I'd heard the rumors that Grandpa's wealth would pass to charity, that his companies would be dissolved, that his grand estate would become a museum. But I had discovered something different, a single codicil hidden in an overlooked drawer of his desk, signed and dated just months ago. It bore my signature in elegant cursive, though I had never signed anything. Someone had forged my name. The solicitor's finger traced a line on the page. "It is the wish of Mr. Knighton that all tangible assets, real estate holdings, stocks, and personal property be divided equally among his 3 grandchildren, subject to the conditions stated in this document." He paused, as though counting our reactions. "However," he continued, "the ultimate beneficiary of the Knighton Trust, which controls the bulk of his liquid assets, approximately $200 million, will be the individual who best exemplifies his virtues of truth, courage, and integrity. An independent panel will determine the award after reviewing each beneficiary's contributions to society." Aunt Lenore's breath hitched. Bianca's smile faltered. Hector glanced at his phone, fingers itching to call his financial advisor. But I felt my pulse quicken with both fear and exhilaration. The panel, comprised of 3 esteemed figures in philanthropy, journalism, and law, would convene within a week. Suddenly, the reading took on a charged air of competition, the soft padding of velvet now a battleground. In that moment, I realized Grandpa had anticipated our squabbles. He'd set the stage for us to prove ourselves, to earn not just a legacy but a future. I swallowed hard. My career had shown me the world's darkest corners. Corruption, betrayal, lies hidden beneath glossy headlines. But I had also uncovered stories that inspired change, exposed truths that others feared. I knew I could stand before that panel and demand the inheritance I had earned through my work. The solicitor closed the book gently, sealing the moment. "The reading is concluded," he announced. Aunt Lenore rose, her voice tight. "Well, this is quite the surprise. Perhaps your grandfather underestimated the generosity of his wife, and overestimated the strength of our convictions." A ripple of laughter followed. I felt the room tilt, as though their mockery threatened to topple me. But I held my ground. "He knew we needed a purpose," I replied, voice steady. "More than a check, he gave us a chance to define ourselves." Their gazes flicked to me, surprise mingling with skepticism. In that moment, I understood that the real contest had begun, not against my family, but against their assumptions of who I was. I turned and left the room before the tension could crush me. Outside, the wind had grown stronger, rustling the leaves in a frenzy. I paused at the threshold, fingertips brushing the carved oak door, and exhaled. Ahead lay interviews with the panel, disclosures, challenges, public and personal. My mind raced with plans to demonstrate my worth, to vindicate the name I'd carried across continents. But the path forward remained shrouded. What would they ask? How would I answer? And would they believe that a woman once dismissed as a wandering reporter could be the true heir to Reginald Oliver Knighton's legacy? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. The night after the will reading, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces. Disbelief, amusement, veiled contempt, as though my presence alone had somehow insulted the legacy they felt entitled to. I wasn't just fighting for an inheritance. I was fighting to prove that everything I had done, every sleepless night, every story published from war zones, every truth I'd clawed from silence, had led to this moment for a reason. By morning, the frost on the windows had begun to melt, and sunlight poured over the sprawling Knighton estate. The stone lions at the gate glistened with dew as I walked past them, coat wrapped tight around my ribs, determination warming me more than any scarf ever could. I was scheduled to meet the panel at 10 a.m. sharp in one of the smaller boardrooms downtown, neutral ground, as the solicitor had said. I arrived early. The panel members trickled in one by one. An older woman named Lydia Vance, chair of a foundation that had rebuilt schools across Eastern Europe, Justice Malcolm Winthrop, a retired judge known for his strict integrity, and finally, Anton Debray, a former journalist turned media ethicist. All three wore expressions of keen attention, but it was Debray whose sharp gaze lingered on me longest. I could feel his unspoken question, "Are you the real thing, or just another media brand?" They invited me to sit, and Lydia offered me tea. It felt surreal, this polite calm before what I imagined would be an emotional cross-examination. Justice Winthrop leaned forward. "Ms. Knighton, you understand why we're here. We've reviewed the legal provisions of your grandfather's trust. This is not about favoritism. We are looking for alignment with his values: truth, courage, and integrity. Please tell us how you've lived those." I nodded. "May I show you something first?" From my bag, I drew a slim binder, my portfolio. Inside were articles, testimonies, and a few photographs. One was from northern Nigeria, where I'd been embedded with a grassroots resistance group documenting displaced families. Another was from a courtroom in Berlin, where I'd testified after uncovering a shell company laundering money through stolen humanitarian funds. There was even a blurry image of me in a Kevlar vest, face partially obscured, interviewing a warlord's translator moments before gunfire erupted. I placed it on the table. I won't list everything. The record speaks for itself. But I can tell you this. Every time I opened a notebook, every time I hit publish, I knew I was putting my name, and sometimes my life, on the line. Not for recognition, not for money, but because someone had to say something when it mattered. And because Grandpa told me once, when I was 17, that silence is a betrayal. They leafed through the binder slowly. I watched their faces, not for approval, but for understanding. And for a moment, I saw it in Debray's eyes, a flicker of reluctant respect. Lydia asked, "What's your next step if you receive the trust?" "Build an independent investigative outlet," I said without hesitation, "not tied to corporations or political agendas, focused on long-form truth-telling, locally and globally, fully transparent funding, and a mentorship wing for young journalists in underrepresented areas." Justice Winthrop tapped the binder thoughtfully. "And if you don't receive it?" I smiled, though my chest burned. "Then I keep doing what I've always done. I keep writing." The interview ended without ceremony. I thanked them and walked back out into the bright, cold day, knowing that Hector, Bianca, and the others would be sitting in the same chair after me. I spent the afternoon in a small cafe off High Street, reviewing the articles I'd once written about corrupt pharmaceutical contracts in sub-Saharan Africa, about child trafficking rings in Moldova, about whistleblowers who had risked everything. I hadn't done it for applause, but now for once it had to mean something tangible. My phone buzzed. A text from Bianca. "Greater than heard you met the panel. Don't get too smug, you'll always be the family embarrassment." I stared at it for a long second, then turned the phone face down. Later that evening, I returned to the estate. Aunt Lenore had arranged a family dinner, more out of obligation than warmth. The long dining table stretched across the candlelit hall, plates of roasted duck and garlic potatoes laid out with sterile perfection. The seating chart had placed me at the far end, opposite Hector, who was already swirling his Bordeaux with practiced boredom. Bianca sat beside me, sipping white wine. "How was your big day?" she asked with faux innocence. "Impress them with your tales of mud huts and dying journalists." They asked. I answered. She leaned in slightly, voice dropping. They won't choose you. Grandpa was just indulging your little phase. This is our world, Rosalind. You're just a guest. I held her gaze. I've never needed your world. Dinner passed in a blur of tense conversation and brittle laughter. But the air shifted when the solicitor arrived mid-meal. He walked directly to me. Ms. Knighton, may I have a word in private? The entire table stilled. I stood and followed him to the side hallway, heart thudding. He handed me a smaller envelope, marked confidential. An update from the panel. One of the conditions in the trust has come under question. We've received allegations, anonymous, that you fabricated part of your Nigeria report. I froze. What? That's absurd. Everything in that report was fact-checked, verified. I have video evidence. Nevertheless, the panel is requesting clarification. I tore open the envelope. Inside was a printed screenshot, an online comment from a throwaway account accusing me of inventing a massacre to boost engagement. Beneath it, a reference to a now-deleted tweet. My stomach turned. Someone's trying to sabotage me, I whispered. We'll need a formal response and supporting documentation within 48 hours. You'll have it, I said. That night, I locked myself in my old childhood room and opened my files. I still had the interview footage, the GPS-tagged photos, the source notes. I would put together a defense so airtight, it would silence every whisper. But I also knew what this meant. Someone in that house didn't just dislike me. They feared I might win. And they were willing to lie to stop me. I stayed up until 3 a.m. compiling the evidence packet. Every piece of documentation was time-stamped, signed, or cross-referenced with third-party sources. I included a notarized affidavit from the NGO leader, who had escorted me to the village in question. My hands trembled as I scanned the files into one PDF. My entire career had built to this moment. And it was under siege. The next morning, I submitted it to the solicitor, who promised to pass it along. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to see my grandfather's grave. The mausoleum was perched on a low hill behind the estate, surrounded by dormant hedges and weeping elms. I knelt on the cold stone and whispered, "You knew they'd fight me. You knew this wouldn't be easy. But why didn't you warn me about the cost?" The wind stirred the leaves gently, as if answering. My phone buzzed again. Another anonymous tip. This one linked to a financial transaction from Hector's investment firm, one of the firms I'd flagged in a buried report for bribery ties. I narrowed my eyes. Was this retaliation or coincidence? Either way, I was no longer just defending myself. I was going to uncover who set me up and why, even if it meant taking down a Knighton. That afternoon, I requested a meeting with Anton Debray alone. He agreed. We met in a neutral cafe, 2 blocks from the legal firm's office. He looked tired, guarded. "You're not just here to defend your story, are you?" he asked. "No," I said. "I think someone forged a tip-off to tank my bid, and I think the reason why lies in something I reported years ago. A company called Novalis International. They've got ties to Knighton Holdings." He raised an eyebrow. "That's a serious accusation." "So's fraud. I don't expect you to take my word. But if I give you proof, will you make sure the panel sees it all?" He studied me, then nodded. "Yes. But if you're wrong, Rosalind, this whole thing will collapse." "Then I better be right." We shook hands. And I walked away knowing one thing with absolute clarity. I wasn't just fighting for Grandpa's legacy anymore. I was about to expose something far bigger than family. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. When I returned to the estate after meeting with Anton Debray, the entire house felt different. It wasn't just the old wallpaper, the dimming chandeliers, or the scent of lilac from the fresh arrangements Lenore had installed in the foyer. It was the sense that something had shifted. Eyes followed me now. Conversations hushed when I entered the room. Somewhere between the panel's inquiry and my counter-defense, I had become a threat, and someone was scrambling to make sure I didn't survive this next move. I didn't need anyone to tell me. I felt it in the way Bianca avoided my gaze at breakfast. pretending to scroll through her phone while sipping black coffee from the family china. I saw it in Hector's tight-lipped silence, in the way Aunt Lenore had stopped asking me snide questions and started watching me like I was a chess piece one move from checkmate. I spent the morning cross-referencing dates, publications, and internal documents tied to Novalis International, an energy conglomerate I'd investigated early in my career for corruption in post-war reconstruction contracts. Back then, I discovered a tangled web of shell companies and government liaisons, but I hadn't connected it to the Knightons. Not until now. Now it looked personal. One of the shell companies Novalis had used to hide their payments, Knighton Energy Holdings UK, incorporated in Manchester, closed quietly 5 years ago. And guess whose name had appeared in a quietly amended shareholder filing? Hector's. It was faint, an alias buried under corporate legalese, but I traced it. And if that link stood up in court, it would mean that Hector had not only inherited dirty money, but he had reason to silence any journalist who knew. I printed the documents and scanned them to a USB stick which I locked in a steel travel case. Just in case. But I didn't want to go to war with my family. I just wanted the truth. Still, I knew I needed help. Someone who didn't have a family name to protect. Someone who had more to lose from a lie than from standing beside me. I called Shayla. She answered on the second ring. Roz? What kind of storm are you walking into this time? Shayla Greer was my closest friend from journalism school. We'd backpacked through Syria with a camera and a prayer. We'd hacked through paywalls and dusty archives. And when I hit rock bottom after a failed series in Cairo, she'd flown in overnight with takeout and a laptop. She owed me nothing, but we had always fought together. I need you to help me verify some old corporate filings. There's something big here, possibly criminal. And I'm not sure who I can trust. Send everything, I'm in. I uploaded the documents, notes, and the Novalis dossier, then pressed send. Shayla would dissect it with surgical precision. Then I turned to the bigger question. If Hector had that much to lose, if someone from the family had already tried to frame me, what else might they do? The next day, I was summoned to a follow-up interview with the panel. This time, all 3 members sat at the long table with tighter faces. Debray looked tense. Winthrop unreadable. Lydia Vance cleared her throat. Rosalind, the panel has reviewed your documentation. The accusation appears to have been entirely unfounded. Your evidence was thorough. I exhaled, but didn't relax. That said, Winthrop added, we received a separate report. Someone submitted what appears to be a digital trail linking you to a shell donation group in Switzerland. The implication being that I took money from one of my own subjects? I interrupted. That's a lie, and I can prove it's manufactured. Debray slid a folder toward me. Inside was a bank statement. My name was typed at the top. A donation trail led to a refugee housing fund, then to a private grant signed in my name. This is fake, I said. Whoever made this knew what they were doing. They used an old address of mine in Morocco. But that apartment was a decoy. I lived in Casablanca under an alias. I have embassy records. Lydia looked at me carefully. Then it's a targeted campaign. It is. Someone is trying to discredit me piece by piece, and I have reason to believe it's tied to Novalis International. Debray's eyebrows shot up. That's a very old scandal. Yes, one that I'm suddenly reconnected to, and one Hector Knighton is tied to directly. They didn't speak, but their silence told me something important. They hadn't known. Not yet. By nightfall, I was exhausted, but Shayla called just as I was falling asleep. Roz, you were right. The Manchester subsidiary? I dug deeper. There's an interlocked board of directors, all offshore. But one of them made a mistake. They signed a memo under their real name last year. It links them to a fraud case in Luxembourg. And Hector is listed as an environmental consultant, the same title he claimed to use when explaining his absurd income last year. It's all in the financial leak I'm forwarding you now. I sat up straight. This could bury him. It could implicate him. If you make it public, be ready. They'll fight. I'm not making it public yet. I'm taking it to the panel first. The final week before the trust's decision was announced arrived like a storm. Meetings, reviews, ethical evaluations. It all blurred. Bianca tried to corner me at lunch one day, asking if I'd seen the new gallery wing she was planning to name after Grandpa. I just nodded, knowing she was trying to plant an image of herself as his favorite. But I had more pressing matters. I requested a final session with the panel. When I entered the room, I carried with me a binder. Inside was the verified web of connections: Knighton Energy Holdings UK, Novalis International, Hector's alias, and the Luxembourg fraud case. I laid it out like a prosecuting attorney. Debray read each page. Winthrop's eyes darkened. Lydia said nothing, just slowly closed the binder. "Thank you, Ms. Knighton. We will take this under immediate review." As I left the room, I passed Hector in the hallway. His expression was unreadable, but he knew. He knew I had found it all. That night, someone broke into my room. They didn't take anything, but they left a single note under my pillow. "Greater than you're playing with fire." I stared at it for a long time, then I burned it in the fireplace. I wasn't afraid. I was furious, and nothing would stop me now. The day before the announcement, I received an unexpected call from Lydia Vance. "Ms. Knighton, there's been an irregularity. We've received confirmation of the Novalis connection. We've also learned that your cousin made a sizable donation to a shell charity, days before the anonymous tips began. We're reconvening the panel. The final review will be postponed by 48 hours. "Thank you," I said quietly. "I understand." I knew what that meant. They were validating everything. And the walls were closing in on Hector. I stood by the garden that night, cold wind biting my face as I watched Aunt Lenore and Bianca speak in low, frantic voices near the greenhouse. When they saw me, they stopped. I walked toward them, calm, composed. "You've both known all along, haven't you?" I asked. Lenore tilted her head. "Known what, dear? That your ambition would blind you?" "No, that Hector was laundering money, that someone was trying to sabotage me. You tried to protect the name, but it's gone. The truth is already in motion." Bianca laughed. "You think you're a hero, but you're just a disruptor. Grandpa wanted legacy, not chaos. Grandpa wanted integrity, and I'm the only one here who honored it." They didn't speak again, just turned away. I stood in the frost, alone but unshaken, because I knew something they didn't. The next day, everything would change. And not even their name could protect them from the truth. To be continued. The morning of the postponed announcement dawned with a strange hush. The estate, usually pulsing with tension and carefully disguised scheming, was still. No clattering dishes in the dining hall, no distant murmur of arguments, no doors slamming in frustration, just silence, like the calm eye of a hurricane. I stood at the window of the guest room, once my childhood bedroom, watching the frost melt on the hedges outside. Beyond them, the towering trees that had flanked the estate for generations cast long shadows in the silver light. For the first time since I returned, I felt like I could breathe. And then I remembered, it wasn't over. The panel hadn't announced the decision yet. Hector hadn't been formally implicated. And whoever had broken into my room still hadn't revealed themselves. I showered, dressed, and took my files, again. Because even now, even with truth on my side, I knew how power worked. It didn't yield just because you caught it in the act. You had to make it answer. At 11 a.m., the panel summoned all 3 Knighton grandchildren to the central parlor of the estate. It was a grand space designed for performances and piano recitals, vaulted ceilings, polished floors, and walls lined with portraits of Knighton's past. The ghost of every ancestor seemed to be watching from their gold frames. Bianca arrived first, draped in a dove-gray dress and her signature pearls. Her expression was unreadable, a careful mask of self-control. Hector followed next, wearing an expression too neutral to be real, shoulders squared, suit pressed, tie just slightly looser than usual. He was trying to appear calm. I arrived last. The panel sat at a table near the fireplace. Lydia Vance in her navy suit, Winthrop in dark tweed, Debray in a turtleneck and blazer. They didn't stand. They didn't smile. "Thank you for coming," Lydia began. We understand the past few days have brought a significant amount of scrutiny and discomfort. It is our responsibility to ensure this process remains fair and in accordance with the values Reginald Knighton entrusted to us." She paused. After extensive review of the allegations against Ms. Knighton and the counter-evidence provided, including records verified by third-party legal and investigative bodies, we find no misconduct on her part. My pulse remains steady. Additionally, she continued, we conducted a thorough audit of the financial trails connected to Novalis International and the now-defunct Knighton Energy Holdings UK. Debray stepped in, and we discovered substantial evidence of fraudulent activity tied to offshore accounts. One alias in particular, used to mask shareholder transfers, was traced to Mr. Hector Knighton. Hector's jaw tightened, Bianca's head whipped around to him. Winthrop continued, "Mr. Knighton, you are now under review for violating the ethical standards required for trust eligibility. The panel will not make a final ruling on your standing until the Knighton family legal team has responded to our findings." There it was. No criminal charges, yet, but exclusion from the inheritance was looming. I could almost hear the silence break like ice. Hector spoke for the first time. His voice was calm, measured. "This is a mistake. Any records connecting me to those accounts are outdated. I divested years ago." Debray raised an eyebrow. "We have records of a donation made last week through a trust still tied to your alias." He didn't respond. Bianca was frozen beside him, calculating. Lydia folded her hands. Therefore, the panel has narrowed the eligible beneficiaries to Ms. Bianca Knighton and Ms. Rosalind Knighton. We will reconvene tomorrow morning for our final determination. Just like that, Hector was out. I should have felt victorious. But I didn't. Because the real game had just begun. Later that afternoon, I took a walk down the back trail that wound behind the estate gardens. I hadn't done it in years, but the cold air cleared my thoughts. Each step on the gravel path felt like a meditation. Here, in the quiet, I could think. And then I heard the crunch of another set of footsteps. I turned. Bianca. She walked with arms crossed, her expression more wounded than furious now. No pearls, no makeup, just her, raw and unreadable. "I suppose I should congratulate you," she said. "I didn't come here to win, Bianca. I came because Grandpa asked me to." "He always liked you best." "That's not true. He didn't pick favorites. He picked values." She stopped walking, her voice dropped to a whisper. "Do you think I wanted to end up like this? Pretending to care about donor luncheons and keeping our name polished like silverware? I didn't have a choice. You left. I stayed. I protected everything. You protected appearances. That's not the same. And you think digging up secrets and throwing grenades into the legacy makes you noble? I think truth is the only thing that holds legacy together." She stared at me for a long time, and for the first time since childhood, I saw not a rival, but a sister caught between expectations and envy. "Then win," she said quietly, "but don't pretend you're clean, Rosalind. You abandoned all of us." She turned and walked away. Her words echoed for a long time, and for the first time since the will reading, I questioned my own reflection. That evening, I received a call from Lydia Vance. "The panel has reached a decision. We will announce it tomorrow at noon. Please be present at the estate." And, "Rosalind?" "Yes. Regardless of outcome, I want you to know you earned your place here, not just because of the work, but because you didn't walk away when it got personal." My throat caught for a moment. "Thank you." I ended the call and sat alone in the study. Tomorrow, it would be over. Or just beginning. The final announcement. Noon, the estate parlor. The same place we'd been called before. Bianca arrived first, this time, then me. Aunt Lenore wasn't invited. The panel sat, faces composed. Lydia stood. After a final review of all documentation, interviews, and ethical audits, the panel has reached a decision regarding the primary beneficiary of the Knighton Trust. Debray rose next. "Reginald Knighton believed in truth, courage, and integrity. We believe only one candidate exemplified all three." A breath. Winthrop said the final words. The full Knighton Trust, valued at $212 million, will be awarded to Ms. Rosalind Knighton. The room didn't explode. It shattered in silence. Bianca sat motionless, then stood, then left the room. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Until Lydia placed the official letter into my hand. And Debray said, "Now comes the harder part, deciding what kind of legacy you want to build." I stood alone in that room, with the ghosts of every Knighton watching. And I knew exactly what I'd do next. Because I hadn't just inherited wealth. I'd inherited responsibility. And I was going to use every cent of it to make sure the truth stayed louder than the silence that had protected this family for decades. To be continued. The weight of the panel's decision didn't hit me until long after the room had emptied. For the first time in my life, I stood in the center of that estate, surrounded by portraits of ancestors who had ruled empires of steel, oil, and politics, and felt them watching not with judgment, but with the eerie stillness of legacy passed on. The Knighton Trust, $212 million of strategic assets, investments, holdings, and philanthropic roots, now sat in my name. My name. Rosalind Knighton. The outcast, the journalist, the unwanted daughter of a black sheep son. I had won. But winning didn't feel like triumph. Not in the way I'd imagined when I'd first walked into that will reading. Humiliated and furious. This victory felt like stepping into a vast room filled with unanswered questions, and locked doors I now had the keys to. Bianca didn't speak to me for 3 days. She vanished from the estate after the announcement. Aunt Lenore had a single conversation with the panel's attorneys, about Hector, about appearances, and then disappeared into the London townhouse she rarely left except for fundraising galas. Hector himself had fled to Geneva before the ink had dried on the trust transfer. The silence, however, didn't last long. By the end of the week, the story had broken in the press. It began as a whisper, a business page headline here, a speculative podcast there. Journalist granddaughter wins billionaire's legacy amid fraud allegations. Then came the interviews, the columnists, the vitriol from legacy Knighton allies who saw me as a threat to the old order. But the worst came when the threats turned real. Anonymous emails, hacked servers, a suspicious tail car on the road as I drove into London. That's when I knew the story wasn't over. It had just evolved. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. I moved into a secure apartment just outside of Kensington. It was sleek and minimal, nothing like the excess of the estate. I didn't want mahogany and marble. I wanted glass, light, space. A place where the only noise was the hum of my espresso machine and the occasional creak of old pipes. I hired a personal cybersecurity expert. Her name was Imani. Former MI5 subcontractor, now consulting independently for high-risk individuals. She wore black turtlenecks, smoked clove cigarettes, and barely blinked. "You've pissed off someone with long fingers," she said on our second meeting. "Knightons? Maybe, but it's wider. You pulled a thread tied to Novalis. That shell company was linked to several foreign state oil deals that weren't exactly above board. I'd be surprised if there wasn't a bounty for your email server. So I'm being watched. Worse, you're being hunted, but not to kill, just to discredit. Even now? Especially now. You have their money. You have the power to expose it all." Imani upgraded my firewalls, encrypted my drives, and gave me a burner phone I wasn't allowed to switch off unless I was somewhere with no electricity. The Knighton fortune came with bodyguards now. And still, I worked. Because if they wanted silence, I'd give them truth instead. I established the Knighton Foundation for Investigative Integrity. The mission: fund long-form investigative journalism in forgotten parts of the world, pair experienced field journalists with local talent, offer legal defense grants to reporters under threat, publish truth no matter who it offended. I reached out to Shayla first. "I want you to be my co-director," I told her. "We'll build it the right way, not tied to legacy media, not sold out to tech firms, just story, integrity, and reach." "I'll pack my bags," she said. By the end of the month, we'd leased a loft in Manchester and hired a skeletal team: fact-checkers, data analysts, legal counsel. I signed the initial seed fund from the trust, $20 million, enough for 3 years of operations. The first story we greenlit? A report on infrastructure corruption in eastern Ukraine. The second? A deep dive into child mining labor in West Africa. The world didn't know yet. But I was building something real. Of course, the family wasn't done. One morning, I received a subpoena, filed in a private civil court in Zurich. Petitioner Hector Knighton. Claim: fraudulent acquisition of family assets. His angle? That my connection to the Knighton Trust had been unduly influenced by panel bias, and that my investigative work had been staged for inheritance leverage. He's going to drag your name through every tabloid from here to Berlin, Imani said. He wants to muddy the waters, make your win look dirty. Then we'll go clean. I flew to Zurich with a briefcase of documents, a translator, and a calm I hadn't known I possessed. Hector didn't look at me in the courtroom. He looked past me, like I was an inconvenient stain on his perfectly pressed shirt. His lawyers were vicious, trained in the art of implication, not proof. But I had more than defense. I had evidence. Emails tying Hector to Novalis energy deals. Financial records from his alias. And then, the recording. It had taken weeks to retrieve from an old encrypted device, but once unlocked, it showed Hector in a private meeting with a former Novalis executive. "We need to bury her," he said, "before she gets that money." That clip changed everything. The judge dismissed the case, sanctioned Hector's attorneys, froze his Zurich accounts. I walked out of the courtroom into crisp mountain air and realized something profound. This war wasn't about inheritance anymore. It was about the future of power itself. I returned to London to find a message waiting from Debray. It was a simple email. Subject: truth, always. Message: legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's what you choose to do while you're here. Keep choosing well. I didn't respond. I just saved it. Because in a world of shadows, even small lights matter. And I wasn't done lighting fires. To be continued. The weeks following the Zurich trial became a strange mixture of calm and upheaval. I returned to the UK legally vindicated, publicly recognized, and financially more powerful than I'd ever imagined. And yet, I felt more watched than free, more exposed than protected. The press had moved beyond mere curiosity. Now they wanted blood, redemption, secrets. Every morning, I opened my inbox to headlines: heiress or hacker, the truth about Rosalind Knighton, the woman who took down her dynasty, a hero or a hypocrite. I knew they'd never let me be just Rosalind. I had become a symbol. And symbols are rarely left alone. The foundation, however, was thriving. With Shayla leading day-to-day operations and a rotating cohort of international fellows arriving each month, we began publishing our first slate of reports. The series on war profiteering in South Sudan went viral after a whistleblower shared it anonymously with a military watchdog. Within days, embassies were issuing statements, and the UN requested to verify our findings. That was the high. The low came shortly after, an anonymous threat sent directly to Shayla's personal number. Greater than "stop digging," or "your next report will be your obituary." She showed it to me in the break room. Her face was pale but steady. "We expected this, Roz, didn't we?" I nodded, "but I didn't expect it to reach you." "I did, and I'm staying, so don't even think about pushing me out for safety." We both knew the risks, but hearing the threat in words, cold, direct, made it real again. I hired a second security consultant, a woman named Renata, retired GCHQ intelligence officer with a reputation for paranoia. Perfect. These threats? They're not amateurs, she told us in our first meeting. They're embedded. Corporate-level surveillance. You've shaken a tree that drops money for powerful people, and they will try to chop you down. So what do? We tighten protocol, encrypt everything, publish fast and clean, and expect infiltration, because it's coming. It came faster than expected. 2 weeks later, a journalist named Theo, one of our freelancers, disappeared while investigating a political scandal in Bucharest. He'd filed his last piece from a hotel room, then silence. His phone, laptop, even social media, dead. We coordinated with local police, embassies, NGOs. Still nothing. I flew to Romania myself. Shayla tried to stop me. "You're the face of this place now, Roz. You can't vanish too." "I won't vanish, but I can't ask these people to risk their lives if I won't do the same." In Bucharest, I met with the last known contact Theo had interviewed, a local academic named Ilona. She looked shaken. "They told him to stop," she whispered over coffee. "He didn't. Now he's gone. They watch everyone who touches that file." "Who is they?" She hesitated. "An informal network. Businessmen, politicians, some ex-military. They use private firms, European fronts with African contracts. It's a ghost system. But your journalist, he found something. I think he's alive, but they moved him." "Moved him where?" "I don't know, but if he's lucky, he's in a black site. If he's not..." She didn't finish the sentence. "Back in the UK, I called in every favor I'd ever earned. Old colleagues, legal contacts, foreign aid liaisons. I even messaged Debray, just 3 words. He's gone missing." His reply came within hours. "Meet me discreetly." He is. The rendezvous was in Geneva, in the back of a nondescript bookstore that doubled as a listening post during the Cold War. Debray looked older, wearier, but sharper than ever. "You touched the Novalis web again," he said. "Didn't you learn the first time?" "My reporter is gone. I won't stop until I know why." He passed me a flash drive. "Encrypted. One-time access. You'll need to open it in Berlin. There's only one place with the right decryption suite." "What's on it?" "A lead, possibly more, but be careful. You're not just fighting your family anymore, you're fighting the market that kept them rich." Berlin was gray, wet, and humming with history. The building Debray directed me to was inside the tech quarter. Faceless concrete, black glass, and no signage. I entered with the code he'd given me. The interior felt like an operating room crossed with an espionage vault. Inside, I met her, the woman who decrypted the drive. She said her name was Ingrid, said she'd worked on data extraction during the Panama Papers leak, said she didn't exist anywhere now. "What Debray gave you? It's not a document, it's an access port." "To what?" "To a surveillance system, a mirror project, built to monitor journalists under the guise of protection, but turned into a control weapon, traces back to Novalis-linked shareholders, cross-jurisdictional, hidden." She entered a string of codes. A black screen lit up. Then a name appeared. Theo Leclerc, flagged. "He was marked 2 weeks ago," Ingrid said, "by a node in Luxembourg. They're watching him in real time. Or they were. His signal's been scrubbed. So he's either in hiding or worse." "Yes, but there's a trail." A blinking dot. A bunker site in Moldova. Back in London, I gathered Shayla, Imani, and Renata. "I know where he is, or at least where he was." "And you want to go?" Shayla asked, stunned. "This isn't a scoop, Roz. This is a war zone." "No, I want to get him out." Imani nodded slowly. "Then we do it like intelligence, not media. We plan, we extract, we protect." And that's how the Knighton Foundation became more than a newsroom. It became a rescue operation. We planned for 8 days. Rented 2 SUVs, hired 3 field contacts, secured false IDs, routed comms through a satellite tower in Cyprus. Everything Renata touched, she fortified. Everything Imani didn't trust, she deleted. On the 9th day, we crossed into Moldova. The site was exactly where the signal had last registered, an abandoned agricultural station in the southern hills. We arrived just after midnight, under cover of fog. The guard was asleep, the cameras dormant. Someone had tried to shut the place down, but too late. In the back building, in a cold, cinder-block cell, we found him. Theo. Alive. Weak, shivering, but alive. "They took my drives," he whispered, "but I memorized the files, names, dates, shipments. They were moving weapons under humanitarian licenses. Your family's company signed the contract. I nodded, steadying him with my hand. Then we take it all back. 3 days later, we released the story. Under full Knighton Foundation byline. It went global. And then everything caught fire. To be continued. The world didn't just react to our exposé, it convulsed. Within 48 hours of publishing Theo's account and the Knighton Foundation's corroborating documents, the global press picked up the story with teeth bared and torches lit. News anchors stammered through words like weaponized aid corridors and Knighton-backed contracts under UN scrutiny. Protesters gathered outside Knighton Energy satellite offices in Amsterdam and Madrid. By the end of the week, multiple European parliaments had called for independent reviews of humanitarian supply contracts linked to the private sector. And me? I was in hiding. Not because I was afraid, but because I was being hunted. 2 days after the story dropped, a firebomb detonated outside our Manchester office. No casualties, thanks to Shayla's last-minute instinct to move the overnight shift to remote work. But the message was clear. They weren't just angry. They were desperate. Renata activated our emergency relocation protocol. We scattered the team across 3 cities, Manchester, London, and Lisbon. Everyone went dark. No social media. No public comms. Imani rerouted our servers through Iceland. Theo was flown to a secure medical facility in Sweden under an alias. Even Shayla's dog was microchipped and relocated. We had crossed a threshold. We were no longer reporting on power. We were in open war with it. The UN investigation moved faster than anyone expected. A leaked memo revealed that at least 2 procurement officers had resigned within 72 hours of our publication. Quietly, yes, but it didn't take long for journalists across France, Germany, and Denmark to connect those dots to our files. The most damning revelation? A contract signed by Knighton Holdings Switzerland 6 years prior authorizing arms shipments under cover of aid. Hector's digital fingerprint was on the authorization metadata. It didn't take long before he was forced out of hiding. A week after the report dropped, Hector issued a public statement from an undisclosed location, denying all knowledge and claiming the documents had been doctored for revenge by a family member with a grudge. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The world was already replying for me. Shayla, ever the realist, cornered me over a secure call one night. We're in too deep, Roz. This is bigger than the Knightons now. You've become a target of every corporate watchdog and back-channel government interest that ever worked with Novalis. So what do you suggest? You go public. You go loud. Live-streamed address. Make them see your face and your conviction. Remind them this isn't just some vendetta, it's a movement. I thought for a long time. Then I called Debray. He answered with a sigh. You're about to do something dramatic, aren't you? I want to address the Foundation's mission directly, globally. I want you there. As what? A witness? A shield? As proof that this isn't a witch hunt. It's the natural evolution of what journalism is supposed to be. There was silence. Then, send me the flight details. Then, the speech was scheduled for a Thursday. Location, Oxford Union. The same place where global leaders and whistleblowers had stood before. It had weight and symbolism, and a live stream with over 5 million subscribers. The day of the address, I walked into that chamber not as a journalist, not as a Knighton, but as a woman who had earned her place not through bloodlines, but truth. The crowd fell quiet. I stepped to the podium. I am Rosalind Knighton, and I am not the legacy you were promised. Gasps, flashes, cameras. I did not inherit power to preserve it. I inherited it to challenge it. The Knighton Trust is no longer a safety net for the privileged. It is now a weapon against the systems that use silence as currency. I spoke for 27 minutes. I told the story. Of the forged signature. The panel. The sabotage. The evidence. The lies. And the people, like Theo, who had nearly died trying to expose it. I closed with this. We are not afraid. We are awake, and we will not be quiet. The applause shook the floorboards, and the internet exploded. Overnight, our donations quadrupled. Our subscriber base surged. Major outlets that had once ignored us now asked for syndication rights. But not all attention was good. Within hours, my personal bank accounts were locked. Our London satellite office was burglarized. My mother, who had kept silent all these years, received a package with no return address. Inside, a USB and a note. Greater than, "She's not who you think she is." Imani investigated the drive. It contained surveillance footage of me. At age 21. Inside a government archive I had no clearance to be in. "They're trying to undermine your credibility retroactively," she said. "Whoever leaked this wants to repaint your whole arc, not as heroism, but as ambition at any cost." "Let them try," I said. "Because they keep forgetting the most important part. Which is, I don't need to protect my name, I need to protect the people who don't have one." 2 weeks later, Theo testified before The Hague. His first-hand account, our digital files, the corroborated sourcing, it all held up. By month's end, Knighton Holdings was under full international audit, and Hector was issued a summons. But he didn't show. Because Hector had disappeared again. Only this time it wasn't to Geneva. Interpol pinged his last signal from Dubai. Then it went dark. I knew what was coming next. The smear campaign. The legal counterattacks. The old money machine roaring to life to destroy the girl who flipped their chessboard. But I also knew this. The next story we were about to publish? It would detonate every last shield they had. Because this one wasn't about Hector. It was about the man who came before him. The man who started it all. My grandfather, Reginald Oliver Knighton. The first time I saw my grandfather cry, I was 9 years old. It was during a thunderstorm that knocked out the estate's power. The generator had failed, and the rain was coming in sideways. He sat in his study, his face illuminated only by the flicker of a dying candle, a letter clutched in his trembling hands. He didn't see me standing in the doorway, barefoot in my pajamas. I remember thinking he looked smaller then, like the man in the portraits had stepped out of his oil paint to sit in the dark with nothing left to command. He never spoke of that night, and neither did I. But now I was beginning to wonder what had been in that letter, and whether everything I had believed about him, his ideals, his guidance, his moral code, had been a lie dressed up in expensive suits and grandfatherly wisdom. We had uncovered the trail by accident. After Theo's testimony at The Hague and the ensuing chaos, the Knighton Foundation team had gone into overdrive. Shayla assigned an entire team to dig into the origin of Knighton Holdings' initial expansion into Eastern Europe. Most of the early records were sealed or buried behind generational shell companies. But one of our junior researchers, a sharp ex-academic named Praveen, discovered something unusual in a 1992 trade filing from post-Soviet Estonia. A subsidiary of Knighton Holdings, then operating under a different name, had acquired control of a disbanded military depot. The documents showed it had been listed as a humanitarian logistics site. But the cargo logs told another story. Weapons. Stolen Soviet-grade weapons. And Reginald Knighton's signature sat at the bottom of the acquisition form. I sat at my desk, staring at the scanned document for 10 full minutes. My coffee had gone cold in my hand. Outside the Foundation's Lisbon safe house, traffic buzzed, mopeds zipped past sunlit sidewalks. But inside, time froze. My grandfather, the man who told me that integrity mattered more than influence, that silence was betrayal, had trafficked arms. Shayla leaned in, her voice barely audible. "Are you okay?" "No," I said quietly, "but I'm ready." We gathered the full team. Renata, Imani, Shayla, Theo, still convalescing in Sweden, joined via encrypted video link. "This changes everything," I said. Hector's corruption, the Novalis entanglement, the sabotage, none of it started with him. It started with Reginald. "And if you expose this?" Renata asked. "You dismantle the legacy you now legally own." "Good." There was a long silence. Then Shayla spoke, "Then we go all the way." We divided the work, Every paper trail, every freight manifest, every audit record, from 1992 through 2003. What we found painted a damning picture. Knighton Holdings had built its war chest not through clean energy or high-tech manufacturing, but through quiet deals in destabilized regions, under the guise of rebuilding. And at the heart of it all was a trust, funneled through banks in Liechtenstein, Zurich, and Qatar, approved by Reginald Oliver Knighton. The next step was the hardest. I needed to confront the last person who might have known the truth and still remained in England. My father. Spade, we hadn't spoken in 6 years. He'd left the family long before I did, retreating into a modest life as a language professor in a coastal town outside Brighton. He never attended family holidays, never replied to Lenore's letters. But he had always loved Grandpa. Idolized him, even. When I showed up at his door, he didn't say anything for a long time. Then, finally, "You're here about the depot." My blood froze. "You knew?" He nodded, eyes tired. He told me once, after the deal was done, said it was necessary, that if our family didn't do it, someone else would. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I didn't know how to live with it, so I left." He handed me something, a letter. The same letter from the thunderstorm night. I unfolded it slowly. It was a confession. Half-coded, half-rationalized. Regret threaded between justifications. He had made the deal to save the family business after the 1991 crash, said he'd intended to pivot to peacekeeping. But the money was too good, the machine too powerful, and soon, he was locked in. "I wanted to be more than just a name on a tower," he wrote. "But I became the blueprint for everything I warned you about. I pray that when you find this, you are braver than I ever was." I cried that night. For him. For the lie. For the truth. And then I did what he asked. I became braver. We prepared the story over 2 brutal, sleepless weeks. Shayla and I wrote the long-form exposé. Theo fact-checked every detail. Imani set up digital redundancies in 5 countries. Renata coordinated with whistleblower protection groups in case of retaliation. When we were ready, I recorded the opening lines myself. "My name is Rosalind Knighton, and I inherited more than a trust. I inherited a secret, one that spans decades, continents, and casualties. This is the real legacy of my grandfather, and what I intend to do with it." Virals. We released it at midnight, GMT. By 2 a.m., it had hit 1 million views. By sunrise, every major global network had picked it up. By noon, the British Parliament had called for an inquiry. And by sundown, Interpol issued a secondary warrant, not for Hector, but for the surviving signatories of the 1992 Estonian weapons deal. That night, I stood alone in the courtyard of the estate. Yes, the Knighton estate. I had returned, not to claim it, but to close it. Tomorrow, it would be converted into the headquarters of the Knighton Foundation. Every room, every hall, repurposed for truth. The portraits would remain, but with context. The legacy wouldn't be erased. It would be redefined. I looked up at the stars, thinking of the girl in her pajamas, watching a man crumble beneath the weight of his choices. I had crumbled too, but I had stood back up, and I wasn't finished. The estate hadn't changed much, at least not physically. The long corridors still smelled of varnished oak and secrets. The chandeliers still shimmered with their quiet arrogance. But when I walked through the main hall after the exposé aired, there were no guards posted, no family portraits staring down with judgment. There was only the staff of the Knighton Foundation, dozens of young journalists, archivists, and technical experts, moving through the house like it had always belonged to truth instead of power. Every desk replaced a chaise lounge. Every private suite became a research cell. And the study where Reginald Knighton had once signed arms contracts by candlelight, now it was a podcast studio, recording testimonies from survivors of the very conflicts he'd helped arm. It was poetic, and also unbearable. The backlash was immediate. Multiple financial publications questioned my motives, spinning the exposé as a legacy grab or a last-ditch rebranding of a scandalized dynasty. A fringe documentary alleged that I had manufactured the Estonian files using AI. Even Hector's new legal team, operating from exile in Montenegro, issued a statement suggesting I had forged the original letter from our grandfather. But none of it stuck, because the documents had been verified by 3 independent labs. And because the world had already decided something else. That the truth, even when uncomfortable, was better than the lie we'd been raised to accept. But with every revolution comes a backlash from within. It started small. A resignation from our cybersecurity chief in Madrid, citing burnout. Then, a story we'd vetted meticulously about human rights violations in Myanmar suddenly lost hosting privileges. Our cloud providers claimed it violated terms of service. Then, Amani's personal laptop was stolen. They're probing, she said, seething, looking for holes, weak points. So we patched them. All of them, I told her. We already did, that's what scares me. We called an emergency summit. Not in a boardroom, but in the estate's old dining hall, now converted into a war room with 12-foot projectors and tactical maps. 72 staffers, partners, contributors. Shayla stood beside me, eyes fierce. We are under digital siege, she said, not just from corporate hackers or rival outlets. From state-aligned entities that want us neutralized, not publicly but functionally. They don't want to bury us in court, I added. They want to strangle us in bandwidth, bleed us through resources, isolate us algorithmically. Someone asked what we should do. We do what we've always done, I said. We report harder. We double our sources. We decentralize. We go so far underground that no one can burn us. Phase 2 was born. We launched satellite micro-teams in Nairobi, Buenos Aires, and Prague. All 3 began working on interlocking exposés, the secret diplomatic laundering that made post-conflict weapon transfers look like medical supply chains. All 3 made breakthroughs. And all 3 were attacked within 10 days. Prague's offices were set on fire. Nairobi's team had their visas pulled. And in Buenos Aires, our 2 senior reporters were arrested on fabricated charges. I posted their stories from the estate. Then flew to Argentina myself. International pressure worked. Our reporters were released. But I made a decision on that flight home. I wasn't going to react anymore. I was going to hit first. The Foundation's internal network housed a research folder titled Blackroot: Unverified Patterns of State Mercenary Convergence. It had started as a theory from one of our freelancers, that a single defunct contractor firm, once tied to Novalis, had morphed into something bigger. A global consultancy for governments who wanted things done that laws didn't allow. Over 2 months, we dug. And dug. And dug. And dug. We found links between Blackroot and off-book operations in Yemen, cyber surveillance deployments in Lagos, and violent suppression efforts during student protests in Bangladesh. And buried in an internal Blackroot memo was a name. H. Knighton, retainer. Not Hector. Henrietta. My aunt. Aunt Lenore. It made a sick kind of sense. She had disappeared too quietly after the will reading, had known too much and spoken too little. And now it looked like she hadn't just known. She had helped orchestrate it. I flew to Vienna. That's where the Blackroot office was headquartered, under a different name, of course. I booked a fake consulting appointment, went in alone, wore a body cam, had a kill switch in my blazer. And she was there. Aunt Lenore, sitting behind a frosted glass desk, staring at me like I was still 9 years old. I was wondering when you'd come, she said. Then you knew we'd find out. Eventually, but you're too late. You inherited money, not the keys. You forged sabotage orders. You coordinated the Novalis leaks. And I kept the family name out of 100 tribunals. You think you're noble, Rosalind, but you're just a virus with a conscience. I hit the button. The recorder uploaded live. She froze. You think that'll matter? Not today. But maybe next week, or next year. It always matters eventually. I walked out. And by morning, the world knew. That exposé made the first look tame, because it proved the rot wasn't limited to one man. It was systemic, familial, intergenerational, and I had lit the whole tree on fire. The foundation survived only because we split it. 2 full operating hubs. One based in Europe, one entirely offshore. We rebuilt our infrastructure like resistance cells. And we kept reporting. Because there were more names, more contracts, more stories. But the deeper I went, the more something gnawed at me. Why had Reginald handed the trust to me, if he knew what he'd done? Why did he want me to have the power to destroy it? And then one of our archivists found it. A sealed envelope, buried in the foundation of the old estate library. Handwritten. To Rosalind. From R.O.K. I didn't open it yet. Not because I was afraid, but because I needed to finish what I'd started. The next report was already underway. And it wasn't about the Knightons. It was about a European banking syndicate funding resource extraction in sovereign territories. And the lead source was one of our own. Someone who had gone missing. Again. To be continued. I kept the envelope sealed for 5 days. Every time I passed it, propped on the edge of my desk like an unopened grenade, I felt its weight shift, as if Reginald had packed more than words into the paper, as if the ink inside was still drying, waiting for me to decide whether I was ready to know what he never had the courage to say aloud. But before I could break that seal, we lost someone else. Her name was Luma. She was one of our youngest analysts, 26, Syrian-born, with a sharp wit and a brain that could memorize ledger codes like poetry. She had uncovered the initial wire transfers between Blackroot and a Luxembourg bank, tracing them through 7 shell firms, before naming one of the investors tied to a mineral rights deal in the Central African Republic. The night she was supposed to hand in her full report, she vanished. No note. No phone activity. Just gone. Amani and Renata led the recovery protocol. Within 6 hours, we had scrubbed her devices remotely, pulled CCTV from the Lisbon metro, and backtraced every call she'd made in the last 30 days. The last ping was from a burner phone, unregistered, bought at a kiosk near the riverfront. She'd called Shayla, left a voicemail. We played it 3 times. The audio was garbled, but we caught 2 words. Wrong people. And something else we almost missed. A GPS coordinate stitched faintly into the background audio. Northern Spain. A port town near the Basque border. We split into 3 teams. One stayed behind to secure the foundation's servers. One dug deeper into the Luxembourg bank. Shayla, Imani, and I flew to Spain. The port town was beautiful and crumbling, a place where fishing boats and data centers shared coastlines, where cafe owners spoke 4 languages and wore scars they never explained. We tracked Luma's signal to an abandoned hotel overlooking the water. Renata had joined us virtually, patching live intel through a drone that circled the rooftop like a silent sentinel. 1 guard, north side, no visible weapons, she whispered into our earpieces. We approached at dusk. Inside, the hotel was gutted. Dust, broken chairs, and in the center of a decayed ballroom, footprints. And a bag. Luma's. Inside it, her field journal. And a flash drive. Caside Mechanar Secure Lisbon node, we decrypted it. What we found broke everything open again. Because it wasn't just about mineral rights. It was about satellite access. Knighton Holdings had once owned shares in a defunct telecom initiative called OryxSat, a failed attempt to create orbital relay networks for underdeveloped regions. But the project hadn't failed. It had been folded into a new multinational intelligence operation. OryxSat had become a surveillance grid, built off humanitarian satellites, and they were selling access to private bidders. In real time. Medical NGOs, political activists, journalist comms. All compromised. I stared at the satellite map overlay and felt something in me harden. They didn't just monitor us, Shayla whispered. They monetized us. And we paid for it with our silence. We traced the most recent data lease. Client code, VSN 9R21K. Payment origin, British Virgin Islands. Final node, Dubai. Same city where Hector had last been seen. I opened the envelope. It wasn't long, just 3 pages. A letter, dated 10 months before his death. The ink was faded, the handwriting uneven. He wrote of regret, of the momentum of ambition, of the fear that silence had turned him into something he never meant to be. He wrote, "I once thought our family was the spine of civilization. Now I know we were just its armor, protecting systems too broken to fix. You are not like me, and I hope to God you never will be. But if you inherit this, don't preserve it, break it, and replace it with something better." Then, a final line. "Inside the chess table drawer, beneath the velvet, there's a second will, my real one." I ran to the study. The chess table was old, a gift from a Saudi prince. I'd seen it 100 times and never thought to look beneath it. I peeled back the velvet. A sealed envelope. Signed, stamped, and notarized in private. Inside, Reginald Knighton had named a different successor. Not me. Not Hector. Not Bianca. Luma. She had been his intern. Quietly. Years before she ever joined the foundation, she had worked in his archives. He'd seen her curiosity, her discipline, her silence. He'd named her as the successor to the humanitarian side of the trust, a clause that had been buried in the legal shuffle after his death. And someone had erased it. I shared it with Shayla first. "So what do you want to do?" she asked. "Honor it." "But she's missing, possibly." "No, she's alive, or someone is trying very hard to make sure we believe she isn't." I called Debray. He answered on the second ring. "You found the letter. You knew?" "I suspected. Reginald came to me 6 months before he died. Asked how one might hide a successor until the truth could survive the family." "And you didn't tell me?" "You weren't ready to hear it. Now you are." "Then help me find her." We sent encrypted feelers through every underground journalist network in Europe. No one had seen her. But one man, a contact in Istanbul, had found something strange. A boat. Registered in her name. Docked at a small island off the coast of Tunisia. Unused. But still maintained. "I'm leaving in the morning. Shayla is coming. Imani will run Foundation Ops while I'm gone. And Theo has just submitted a new draft. Title, The Satellite Empire, How Philanthropy Became the New Surveillance State." He ends it with a line that echoes in my mind even now. "Some legacies are inherited, others are intercepted, but the rarest ones are rewritten." Tomorrow I go to find Luma, to return what was stolen, and maybe, finally, to stop running from the truth I've carried since the will reading. Spaso heard. The sea off the coast of Tunisia was sharp with salt and silence. Shayla and I stood on the deck of a chartered cutter, the wind dragging our coats open, hair whipped into halos as we approached the small island listed in the boat registry. It had no name on most maps, just a set of coordinates and a note in maritime records that read, "Uninhabited except for fishing structures." It looked like a smear of rock and bone, stone houses worn down by time, one radio tower, and a single dock. But from the moment I stepped onto the weathered planks, I knew. Luma had been here. Pass. The interior of the island was sparse, brutalist, and strangely elegant. An old watchtower had been converted into a living space, and inside it, someone had left behind signs of life. A solar-powered laptop, sand-worn books in 5 languages, and pinned to a corkboard, diagrams of the Oryxat grid, paper maps of Eastern Europe, even stills of Theo during his recovery in Sweden. "She's been watching us," Shayla murmured. No, I said. She's been protecting us. We found no blood, no signs of a struggle. No footprints other than hers. But on the table sat a note. Typed. Unsigned. Greater than you followed the right thread. But don't pull it all at once. Some tapestries are too tangled to unravel without tearing the cloth. If I'm still alive, I'll find you. If I'm not, don't stop. The satellite keys are hidden in the place where silence lives. I read the line again. Where silence lives, I whispered. Shayla stared at me. That's not a metaphor, is it? No, I think it's an address. Back in Lisbon, I pored through Luma's old research logs. She kept meticulous notes, dates, codenames, metadata, but always wrapped her intentions in riddles. In one entry, I found a mention of the Silent Archive. I knew that name. It was a long-rumored facility in the Swiss Alps, off the books, privately owned, used by state actors and corporations alike to store hard copy records immune to digital breaches. If the Oryx Sat access keys existed, that's where they'd be. I needed help, and there was only one person who could get us inside. Debray met us in a quiet courtyard in Zurich. He wore a dark overcoat, gloves, and the same skeptical frown he always carried when I was about to drag him back into the fire. You want to break into a private archive protected by 4 intelligence agencies, 3 private militias, and a weather pattern that kills signal drones. No. I want to expose a global surveillance cartel built on my family's fortune, and I need your keycard. He sighed, then handed it over. You have 36 hours. After that, their AI audits flag the breach and backtrace every login. 36 is enough. Lack. We climbed into the mountains under cover of storm. Shayla stayed behind to manage ground support. I went in with Imani. Renata routed us through blind angles and shadowed satellite loops. The Silent Archive looked like an eco-resort. A green roof, snow-slicked stone, and passive solar towers. But its security was military-grade. We wore thermal suits, moved like ghosts. Inside, the walls were lined with paper. Real, physical documents. And in room D7, inside an unmarked drawer beneath a defunct Vatican patent file, we found it. The Oryx Sat master key. A slip of hardened polymer coated with a 256-bit encryption layer. On it? Coordinates. Signal frequencies. Emergency override algorithms. If someone had this, Imani whispered, they could see everything. Or shut it down. We took photos, left the key, no trace. And ran. Act. By the time we returned to Lisbon, Renata had bad news. Your public identity's been flagged, not just in the EU, but Interpol. Someone's filed an indictment. On what charges? Theft of classified intelligence, terror-linked surveillance, corporate espionage. All fake. All active. So we publish. We released the Oryx Sat dossier in waves. First, the technical specs, enough to prove the program's real. Then, the financial trails. Then the access logs, proof of its abuse. Governments around the world panicked. Some denied knowledge. Some blamed rogue divisions. Some just went silent. But the public? They erupted. Protests in Berlin, sit-ins in Montreal, digital strikes across Latin America. People had believed that data was neutral, that satellites were benevolent. Now they knew better. Now they knew we'd sold the sky. Then Luma called. A scrambled voice message, no video, one sentence. There's one final piece, and it's not in a vault, it's in a man. Then coordinates. Uzbekistan. I didn't hesitate. Shayla begged me to wait. Renata said it was a trap. But I knew that voice. Knew the cadence, the risk. Knew her. And I had one more promise to keep. The location was a border town near Samarkand. Dust-choked. Ruins tucked into strip malls. The man's name was Arslan Bek. He'd once run logistics for Oryxat's test phase. Now he ran a motorcycle garage. He didn't flinch when I said Luma's name. She was here 2 weeks ago, told me you'd come. Why? He handed me a file. Because she needed someone to carry what she couldn't. Inside, the proof. That Knighton Holdings hadn't just funded surveillance. They'd sold targeting data. For drone strikes. And the man who brokered those deals was still alive. Still hiding. Still speaking to people in my name. Hector. Like Tara. The heat in Uzbekistan was different. Bone dry and whisper quiet. Like even the air had secrets it wouldn't give up easily. I stared at the folder Arslan Bek had handed me, its pages brittle but exact. Payment trails, encryption logs, airspace clearance documents from 10 years ago. All tied to the same entity, Oryxat. But not for surveillance. For kill lists. Civilian kill lists. The satellite data had been sold to buyers who weaponized location information under the guise of counterterrorism. Aid workers. Journalists. Even school teachers who had spoken against authoritarian regimes. And the name that kept surfacing in the transfer memos, coded but unmistakable, was Hector Knighton. He hadn't just disappeared into exile. He had become the architect of a weaponized sky. When I returned to Lisbon, the Foundation's mood was a boiling point beneath calm. Shayla was waiting for me on the roof. You found something. Too much. I handed her the documents. She scanned them, didn't speak. Just passed them to Amani. We release it, she said finally. Not yet. Why? This is the last nail. Because Luma's still out there. And if she's alive, she's watching, waiting to see what we do with it. Then what do? We make Hector show himself. The trap was simple. We sent a ghost memo into Blackroot's digital bloodstream, claiming to have intercepted a rogue faction of Oryxat data brokers. It named false coordinates, set a meeting in Tbilisi. We embedded a traceable beacon in the metadata. And waited. 3 days later, someone accessed the file. From a secured node in Bangkok. 2 days after that, a private jet took off for Georgia. Passenger manifest listed an alias we'd seen before. Henry K. Olin. Hector. Pass. He walked into the cafe like a man who had never lost anything. Gray suit, open collar, smile like a sun-bleached knife. I was already seated. Our eyes met. Neither of us flinched. I figured you'd come crawling eventually, he said. You always did mistake rage for dependence. He laughed. So what is this? An intervention? A last gasp of a dying foundation? It's an end. To what? Me? To all of it. The satellites, the secrecy, the blood. He leaned back. You think truth saves people, but it just shifts the burden. You're not a liberator, Rosalind. You're just someone who got lucky. I slid a photo across the table. Luma. Standing on the dock in Tunisia, looking straight at the hidden camera we'd recovered. She's alive, I said. His hand twitched. Got him. She has everything. Then why come here? Because I wanted to see the man who buried our family in empire and thought he could build a throne from ash. He stood. You're brave. I'll give you that. But you won't survive the next stage. Neither will you. He was arrested an hour later. Interpol picked him up outside the airport. One of our operatives had tipped off 3 jurisdictions. By nightfall, Hector Knighton was in custody. The charges: war crimes, corporate terrorism, misuse of classified satellite intelligence. We didn't celebrate. There was nothing joyful about justice when it arrived this late. Instead, we published the final dossier. A full breakdown of the Oryxat to Blackroot pipeline, victim lists, data leaks, the true story of what had been done in our name. It broke the internet. Governments scrambled. Allies turned. A global moratorium on privatized orbital surveillance was signed by 17 nations. But most importantly, families of victims finally had names. Not just of the lost, but of the men who profited from their disappearance. Weeks passed. Then months. The Knighton Foundation survived, barely. We lost half our funding. Multiple lawsuits hung in limbo. But our audience tripled. Whistleblowers we never thought would trust anyone began to reach out. And then, finally, Luma returned. She walked into the Lisbon office one morning just before dawn. Wearing a scarf over her hair, a satchel slung over her shoulder, and a faint scar over her left temple. Shayla screamed. I didn't. I just walked forward and hugged her. She didn't speak for a long time. Then, I knew you'd follow the right thread. You gave us the map. You gave it meaning. I handed her Reginald's second will. She read it in silence. I don't want the trust, she said. It was always yours. Then use it, in my name. But under your voice, people trust you. I nodded. We buried the letter that afternoon. At the estate, beneath the new memorial garden, where the names of Oryxat's known victims were etched into glass. We never rebuilt the old house. We let it fade. But we kept the foundation. And we grew it. Now it operates in 9 cities. With no last names. No family shields. Only stories. I tell you all this not because I want applause, but because you need to know. If they ever humiliate you in a room full of people who think they own the world, stand up. Walk out. Build something bigger. And when they laugh again, let them. Then show them the sky they never thought you'd touch. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications. I remember the hush that fell over the grand oak-paneled room as I stepped forward, clutching a slender envelope that bore my name in precise, looping script. My heels clicked against the polished marble floor, each step echoing like a warning. Outside, the autumn wind whispered against stained glass windows, but in that moment, the only sound was the soft rustle of silk and velvet as relatives in their finest attire shifted in their seats. I pressed my palms to still their tremor and inhaled, tasting the faint trace of lavender from my mother's perfume, a ghost of comfort in a place that felt more like a tribunal than a family gathering. My name is Rosalind Knighton. Until today, I was known as the black sheep of the Knighton clan, the one who left town at 18 to chase a career in investigative journalism, earning praise in bylines but gaining little in goodwill. I returned only because my grandfather, the venerable patriarch whose fortune was whispered about in Wall Street circles, had summoned me. He was dying, he said. And in the cryptic way my family always spoke, he had insisted I attend the reading of his will